From the moment that encounter happened, everything shifted. Something clicked into place. It wasn't about what was said, nor was it about planned gestures. It was about the presence, about the way one gaze found another, and, without asking for permission, lingered. There's a peace that settles in when you're close, a kind of silence that doesn't weigh you down. It's easy to forget the world when you have someone who understands effortlessly. It's hard to pretend nothing has changed. One can go their whole life without feeling this. But when it happens, you never forget. And maybe, just maybe, this is the kind of connection that defies explanation. It's just lived, or it's held on to, if it's not too late. Something was recognized. And since then, nothing could stay in the same place. There's no noise when it happens, there's no warning, you don't hear anything, but something shifts. It's subtle, yet clear. As if, all of a sudden, your entire body knew something that your mind was still trying to deny. And that's exactly how it was. The day continued normally. Nothing seemed different, but everything was already off kilter. Because when two gazes meet and recognize each other, time loses control. It's not love at first sight. It's not enchantment. It's not that rehearsed chill in the stomach. It's something more raw, something that disarms without haste but without asking for permission. And right there, in that moment that no one saw, it happened. The connection, the comfortable silence, the feeling that doesn't weigh you down. There was no need to name it, no definitions, promises, or guarantees. But it was real. And since then, nothing else has been able to resemble it. It's rare to find a place where the heart can rest without needing to hide. Many people pretend to feel comfort. Many people fit in to belong. But what happened there was different. It was authentic. No masks, no filters. And that's why it resonated so deeply, because no one there needed to explain themselves. There were no questions that called for defenses. There was no fear in showing what lies behind the eyes. The presence was enough. And when a presence is enough, the rest of the world begins to feel shallow. It's not about dependency, it's not neediness. It's just that when you experience something that truly touches you, everything that doesn't starts to hurt. It begins to feel too empty. Certain connections don't ask for space, they create one. Life goes on, of course. Full schedule, commitments, distractions, responsibilities. But somewhere, deep down, almost silently, there lies the memory of what was felt. No photos are needed, nor messages. It's marked on another level. And when something makes that kind of mark, everything around starts to revolve around it. Not because it was decided, but because it simply becomes inevitable. It's not the absence that hurts. It's the memory of what can't be replaced. There was presence, there was exchange, there was something rare. And no matter how hard you try to rationalize, compare, or replace, it doesn't work. Because when something real happens, the body remembers. The soul doesn't forget, and everything that comes after carries the shadow of what was real. Conversations change. The gaze becomes more discerning. Experiences lose their flavor, because the benchmark has shifted. And maybe the hardest part is this: trying to go back to who you were before feeling what you felt. Trying to pretend it's possible to live without what touched so deeply, but it's not. And the truth is, that thing is still alive even if no one talks about it anymore. It doesn't need confirmation, it doesn't need to be said. It's in the air. It's in the way thoughts insist on returning. It's in the discomfort of everything that doesn't come close. And that's enough to know it still matters. Time may pass, distances may grow, but there's one thing no one can control: emotional memory. What the body recognizes even when the mind tries to forget. What burns without reason. What reappears in moments of silence. Some stories don't need clear endings. They just need to be felt. And this one was felt, from the very beginning, with the intensity of someone who didn't prepare but dove in anyway. With the commitment of someone who didn't need guarantees. With the shock of someone who thought they wouldn't feel anything again, only to feel everything at once. And now, it's hard to pretend nothing happened. Even as the world continues on, even as the days go by, even as paths diverge, because what was lived there doesn't depend on continuity. It only depends on the truth that was felt. And that truth, it can't be erased. Some connections are like maps. They don't show where you are, but they remind you of where you don't want to leave. There's no way to replicate what was unique. There's no way to find in another the same kind of silence, the same kind of gaze, the same kind of presence, because it's not about the other. It's about what happens inside, and what happened there was irreversible. Perhaps life goes on as it always has, but something remains. Something was etched in time, in memory, in the body. Something that, even without a name, carries weight. It has truth. It has soul. One can spend a lifetime next to the right people and still miss that one person who touched without asking for permission. That's it. There's nothing that can be said now to change what was. But perhaps there's a reason this memory doesn't fade away. Maybe it's because there's still something to be lived, or perhaps it's simply because it was real. And what is real never fully dissolves. And deep down there's always a point that returns. The way it was felt. The way the world seemed lighter for a few moments. The peace of not needing to be strong. The relief of not having to pretend. The freedom of just being. Being. With someone who doesn't demand, who doesn't expect, who simply sees. And seeing nowadays is almost a miracle. This story might never be spoken out loud, but it will always be felt in silence. And maybe that's what makes it so unforgettable. There's a type of feeling that doesn't need to be spoken, because it's whole in the absence. And it's in the absence that the impact is measured, because it's not the longing for what was lived. It's the lack of what is still alive, even when it's no longer shared. It's the echo of everything that was felt, crossing through days, places, and attempts to move on. Some presences remain alive, even when the body is no longer close. Because what remains does not depend on touch or time. It stays in the skin, yes, but also in the rhythm of thoughts. In the way certain songs no longer resonate the same way. In the discomfort that appears when someone tries to take that same place and fails. The body keeps going. But something inside still waits for an answer that never came. Maybe it's not an exact question, maybe it never was, but the waiting exists, in silence, without pressure. Just as someone who recognizes that something was interrupted before it was ready. And this interruption is not forgotten. Because certain connections have no substitutes. They don't fade away with new names, distractions, or time. They linger there, where the mind doesn't touch but where everything pulses. Certain stories do not depend on continuity. They live in the depth. It's not necessary to move forward for a story to be true. It's not required to reach the end. It's enough that it existed in its entirety. And this existed. There were no games. There was no competition. There was no need to disguise. It was raw. It was direct. It was real. And what is real never becomes easy to forget. There's a precise moment when everything breaks. When you realize the other felt the same, but stayed silent, stayed still, stayed distant, and yet stayed inside, stayed in gestures, stayed in every attempt to move on. It doesn't matter how much time passes. Some connections don't unravel. They just transform into something invisible yet present, something that shapes choices, that hardens the criteria. That redefines what is expected from affection, and that's where the hardest truth lies. After feeling something so profound, nothing else can ever be enough. It doesn't matter how hard you try. It doesn't matter how many new faces come into view. Nothing else touches in the same way because what was felt, it was unique. And those who felt it know, even if they pretend, even if they say otherwise, even if they've learned to hide it. And it's this knowing that weighs heavy, because there's no going back to how things were before. The benchmark has changed. The sensitivity has shifted. The truth was felt, and it can no longer be denied. Some people come into our lives and leave marks. Others leave open wounds that carry the scent of nostalgia. And this nostalgia doesn't scream. It whispers. It surfaces in mundane details, in the way silence has become more pronounced, in how certain places, certain times, certain gestures are avoided. Because everything reminds you, and when everything reminds you, it's a sign that nothing has passed. It wasn't about love, it was about connection, and that is much rarer. Love exists in many places. Connection like this does not. It's not about frequency, it's not about companionship, it's not about time, it's about depth. It's about how much you see and are willing to be seen. It's about how deeply you feel without having to explain. It's about how everything makes sense even when nothing is said. And when that happens, there's no turning back. There's no way to be superficial again. There's no way to accept less. If it were only about physical presence, the world would be full of complete bonds. But what separates the touch of the soul is the absence of truth. And here, there was truth. Even if briefly, even if silently, even if interrupted. And that's why it hurts. Not because it's over, but because it lingers, even without continuity. What to do with what remains, with what still pulses even when no one else speaks of it? Nothing. Because there are feelings that don't need a resolution. They only need to be respected. And this is one of them. It doesn't need to turn into a relationship. It doesn't need to come back. It doesn't need to have an ending. It only needs to be remembered as it was. Intense, honest, deep. Deep enough to never allow the heart to accept half measures. And maybe deep down, all of this exists only because it was never said out loud. Perhaps silence is where this story remains alive. Perhaps what hurts is exactly what keeps it real. And that's okay. Not everything that is felt needs to become a story told. Some things just need to be felt until the end, even if they linger in between, and still, there's something that insists on remaining, that won't accept the end, that returns every time life tries to move on. It's not attachment, it's not an illusion. It's just that when you truly feel, you don't forget. And when you don't forget, everything comes back. In the form of memory, in the form of absence, in the form of desire, in the form of silence. And silence always reveals more than words can hide. Silence doesn't ask for attention, but it screams when no one is looking. It's not just any absence. It's an absence with a name, with a face, with a memory. It's the one that lingers when everyone leaves. The one that reappears at the most inconvenient moments, like a presence that no one sees, but insists on being there. And the most unsettling thing isn't what's missing, it's what remains. Everything is left over. Every detail, every word spoken with the eyes, every sentence interrupted because there was nothing more to say. Every touch not given, but felt. And what stays when the other goes is what no one can take away. Because it was lived, and what is lived even in silence shapes. It's not missing someone. It's missing what was felt in that moment, because there, something fell apart, something that didn't yet have form, something that was born without being announced. But even so, it was ripped away. And it's not about possession, it never was. It was about surrender, about that feeling of being exactly where you were meant to be, even if the world said otherwise, even if everything conspired to push you apart. And still, it remained, not in time, but in memory, in feeling, in what no one else has been able to replace. Certain experiences create a sort of emotional demand. After them, everything shallow hurts. It's not about comparison. It's as if the body becomes aware that there is another level of presence, a different type of depth. And once you experience this, everything else seems too pale, tasteless, without truth. Because now there is a benchmark, a before and an after. And the after seems smaller. Smaller because it feels safer. Smaller because it's more calculated. Smaller because it's not that, and by not being that, it becomes insufficient. One can fill every space and still miss that unique glance that made time stand still. This is how the memory stays alive, not because of what was done, not because of promises, not because of unfinished conversations, but because of the impact of presence. For what was felt without needing to be said. And that's what scares the most, because there's no rational explanation, there's no clear reason. There's only the feeling, raw, whole, present, and those who feel, recognize, even if they pretend otherwise, even if they learn to disguise it, even if they accept other paths, the truth does not dissolve, the truth does not yield. The connection was real, and that's enough for the absence to never just be absence. It's memory, it's a record, it's a type of scar that doesn't hurt, but also doesn't fade. And even as life goes on, something always escapes. A fleeting thought, a song, a name that appears without being called. a date that is never forgotten. And it's in that moment that everything returns. Not with the same force, but with the same meaning, as if to say it's still here, and it is. Not as presence, but as part. There are things that become part of you, even if no one sees, even if no one remembers anymore, and that tires you out. It tires you out because it can't be explained. Because when you try, the words never come close. There's no narrative that translates what was felt. There's only sensation. And sensation cannot be convinced. It lives, it breathes, it insists, even when it shouldn't anymore. And maybe it's that insistence that hurts, because if it still exists, it's because something was left open. Something isn't finished. Something still throbs. Some feelings don't die. They just withdraw to survive time. And it's in that withdrawal that they gain strength. They don't show up every day, they don't disrupt routines, but they're there, waiting for a scent, a memory, any small opening to make themselves present. And when they come in full force, without warning, without control, and they deconstruct without needing to speak, without needing to touch. They deconstruct because they touch a place that's been left unprotected, because deep down, nothing else has reached that deep. And now everything is a filter, everything is measure, everything is waiting disguised as detachment. One can say it's over, one can pretend to forget, one can even appear calm. But those who have lived it know. They know that it was unique. They know they've never felt anything like it again. They know it wasn't just anything. And it's this knowledge that weighs heavy, not out of pain, but out of presence, because it's still there, silent, invisible, but solid. It's not about going back. It's about not being able to leave, no matter how much time passes. No matter how much reality changes, there are bonds that don't break. They weren't built with words nor with logic. They were created with truth, and truth doesn't accept being buried. It remains and pulses, even when everything around seems to move on. And the question that lingers has never been spoken. What if there's still something left unexperienced? What if time wasn't enough? What if what was left was actually just the beginning? These questions don't seek answers, because those who feel already know, even without certainty, even without answers, because when it's real, the feeling is all that matters. If you felt all of this too, comment, share, and subscribe for more truths like this.